Thank you. So, I suppose I should say this, sort of the preamble is, if you work in an advertising agency, and I don't know what your view of advertising is, but often the general public's view of advertising is that we are people who know how to make people do things that they didn't want to do almost against their will. Like we have this ability to understand motivation in this kind of like a dark art to say, that's not the washing powder you're buying, you know, so it's like this. Whereas in fact that's not, but that isn't advertising's dirty secret. Advertising's dirty secret is we can barely get people to do things that they said they wanted to do anyway, right? Which is why so many new product launches fail. You talk to people and say, what would motivate you to buy, to change your washing powder? And they'd say, oh, if it washed twice and came in a bigger pack and it costs less. And you do all these things and nothing happens. And what this reveals is two important things, is that our own instincts about what motivates people are often just wrong. We have a narrow belief about what motivates people, which ignores quite a lot of why factors. And so it also means if you ask other people about what would motivate them, they give you an answer, but there's a high probability that it won't be some or even all of the truth. So what I want to explore here is the real nature of motivation. And what it really comes down to is people don't really know what will motivate them until they see it in front of them. So you can ask people to predict what will motivate them, and they'll give you an answer, but the chance of it being right or wrong are, you know, it's up in the air. So it's not until they sort of see something. Now, to explain what's going on behind this, I need to explain the psychology of behavioural economics to you in one chart. I believe it can be done. I can take 40 or 50 years of academic study and do it in a single slide, right? So I've done it before, I'm going to do it again. So this is a little psychological test. It's quite a standard test, and this is the example used by a man called Daniel Kahneman. So I don't know if anyone's read or bought a copy of Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. It's an excellent book to have on your desk because it makes you look very clever and up to date. It's an even better book to actually have read. Right? I rarely recommend pop psychology books because they tend to be a little bit flaky, but Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in 2002 for his work in behavioural economics. He's regarded as a sort of founding father of it. And it's a brilliant book because he doesn't pull his punches intellectually, but he makes it incredibly readable. So if you only make the effort to read one book in this area, it's the one to read. And Kahneman calls the book Thinking Fast and Slow. He says there are sort of heroes of the piece, right? These two modes of thinking. And fast thinking is our preferred way of thinking. So it's quick, effortless, automatic, right? It's the kind of thinking you can do all day, and it's your preferred way of thinking about it. In contrast is slow thinking, which is, as the name suggests, slow, effortful, tiring, deductive. It's the way you prefer not to have to sort things out, right? Now the challenge when you design a decision, when you present a choice to people is, ideally you present it so they think about it in the fast mode, rather than the slow mode. You don't really want to present people something they have to work out. You want to present something they just get. Right? This is sort of the challenge of designing things. Now I've explained it to you now, but what I want to give you now is a chance to experience the difference between fast and slow thinking. So this is kind of live psychology, right? You didn't know that would happen today, did you, right? So this is very simple. No one is going to be hurt in the making of this experiment, right? So, well, unless you want to be hurt, right? So it's your own business. But what I'm going to ask you to do in a moment, just do this in your heads, because if you do it out loud, it's kind of freaky, right? In a moment, it's a very simple test. This is not a sort of like, can you or can't you do it, right? I'm going to put a list of words up and just go through counting the words off to yourself. Is the word in upper or lower case? It's a simple categorization task, just a upper or lower case, right? Go through the list. So here it is. So I'm assuming you're at the bottom there. You know, so all English speakers in the room, right? So that's really easy, right? Upper, lower, lower, upper, upper, lower, upper, lower, right? You just whip through. That's fast thinking, right? I just want you to sort of reflect on that experience. You went through that very easily. So now I'm going to put another list of words up, and it's the same task, just categorize the words upper or lower case. So I know from those little smiles that break on people's faces, that little noise goes around the room. After about a second and a half, reliably, I've done this a lot of times, I know exactly how it's going to play out, right? Because what you do is, you read the first one, you read upper, and then you realize it's in lowercase, and you correct yourself. And that moment you felt where that thinking kicks in, that's slow thinking, or sometimes called system 2 thinking, coming into effect. And really that's how sort of slow thinking often works, is you do something and then it corrects you, right? Now the interesting thing about this is that little correction uses up a small amount of, a small amount of energy. And this has can have a dramatic effect over the day. So if you were given a task where you had 5,000 cards with words like this on, if they were like the ones on the left, you could do the task, you think, well, that was a bit strange, but here's a psychology experiment, what did I expect? And you'd be fine and you go about your day. 5,000 cards like the one on the right, by the end you'd be tired, irritable, argumentative, you'd have a road rage incident on the way home, you'd argue with your spouse, you'd fail in your diet, you'd have that extra glass of wine you didn't meant to, you'd forget to brush your teeth. Because all those little unnecessary decisions, it turns out they sort of wear out your decision-making capacity for the day, which means by the time you get to the end of the day, you really have no time left to be, say, patient with your children or things like that, right? So it's really important to look after your own decision-making kind of skills, and it's really important to respect those of others. So there is a kind of radical theory that this explains, for example, why often the poorest members of our society are also the most obese. Because you think at a rational level, right? You think, well, if you have no money, you can't buy any food, so you should be stick thin, right? That's sort of, well, you can sort of say how you might. But we know if you sort of look around the streets that this isn't the case. But the truth about being impoverished is that life is incredibly stressful because everything is uncertain. Because if something goes wrong, you can't afford it, and your whole life sort of goes off track. So you spend your whole day sort of arguing with the benefits office and arguing with your landlord and trying to get a job or trying to avoid getting a job and looking after your feral children. And all of this is exhausting, right? So it means that when you walk past a chicken shop, your chances of resisting the lure of fried chicken is almost zero because you're mentally exhausted already because that's how your life is. So consequently, you used to live on a constant diet of incredibly cheap chicken, right? And you explode in size because you have no way of resisting it, almost no way of resisting it. Whereas if you're middle class, you used to spend your day designing an intranet, it's very easy to go, it's very easy to sort of go home and just go, Kenmore salad, darling, right? Because life is just simpler, right? So I think there's a certain sort of intuitive truth in this, but certainly we can recognise in our own periods of our life where you're very stressed, it's very hard to make other good decisions on top of that. And if there's a sort of life lesson here, is you should try not to make a lot of big decisions in one go. Obviously, sometimes life throws that at you and you have to deal with it, but make big decisions in the morning when you feel fresh, don't leave them to the evening. Why do people always start arguments in relationships about midnight? Right? It's because they just got too tired to resist saying the thing they didn't want to say, and then it all kicks off. So, right. I sense that people recognise that tendency in themselves, right? So they will. So the thing about this is people sometimes hope you can kind of learn your way out of it. You can learn to make better decisions. I think that's Kahneman. I've had the good fortune to meet Kahneman, and because I used to teach a course called How to Make Better Decisions, I thought I'd better check. I said, Daniel, is it possible to learn to make better decisions? And I was hoping for a nuanced answer, and he says, no, because he's a very grumpy old man, right? But actually, he says, no, you can't. But you can't stop making the mistakes, but you can learn to correct them quicker. And he says we partly do this by anticipating gossip. So it says it's like when you make a decision, you should think about, because you haven't corrected yourself, well, what would other people say if they saw me doing that? If they say you're an idiot, you probably shouldn't have done it, or you shouldn't do it, right? And you can sort of, that anticipation of regret is a way of sort of correcting thoughts. He's very articulate about this, more articulate than I'm managing to be. But I think what I want to show you next is a little bit of proof that this kind of way of thinking about things where we don't really know how we feel about them until they're put in front of us, because we don't work out what something's worth or what we should be doing, how hardwired this is. So I'm going to show you an experiment with these little characters here. These are capuchin monkeys, right? And they're adorable little creatures, right? And this is the video clip, it'll be explained clearly, but this is a test where if you ask someone, what do you need to be paid to do a task? You might imagine that you sort of, somehow you can look in some sort of internal meter that goes, this is clearly a £28.50 kind of task, right? You can say, or I need you to, you know, but of course we know we don't really work like that. They would say, well, it's a bit more like, I'll mow your lawn if you mow my lawn next week, right? We understand that sort of intuitive stuff, that kind of quid pro quo a lot more easily. And this is an example of where, in this example, you know what something's worth, until then suddenly you really don't know what it's worth, or your mind, or you change your mind dramatically about its worth. So let's watch the clip, and I'll talk a little bit more afterwards. So here it comes. That, because it's that thing, you can imagine if you're at work and your boss says, and you've got a bonus this year, you've got £5,000, you'll feel brilliant up until the point where you find everyone else got 10,000, right? And you don't sort of sit there and go, well, maybe that's all I was worth, right? You just go mental, right? You have a total cucumber moment, as I come to think of them. And my life is increasingly full of many cucumber kind of moments. And it's this thing where the monkey has no inner set sense of what its labour, in this case, is worth, right? It's worth what the other monkey is paid. All the time it's a cucumber economy, it's fine. As soon as it's a grape economy, it's a great job, right? That's how the sort of motivation is set. There's very little internal information. It's an entirely externally set thing. Apparently there's an experiment run in French. I can't help imagine they are French monkeys, where the other one goes on strike until the others, they're like French socialist monkeys. They go on strike until the other one is paid with a grape. I also think because they're French monkeys, it's the only one where they demanded to take part in cigarette experiments. They could have more jeton. And they sort of say, oh, I'm not doing anything for your grape. It is just a rock. It reminds me of Sisyphus and a Camus novel. I over-imagine these French monkeys, I think. But I think what we notice is that motivation is this very fragile thing. And often it's getting the same as other people, or near enough the same. It's a very sort of intangible quality. And it's not the tangible reward that drives people, it's those intangible settings. And you get some interesting examples where if you take an intangible commitment or an intangible kind of value and you put a price on it, you destroy that value. So I do know from meeting a professional, one of the classes we used to teach at the School of Life is called How to Find a Job You Love. And you might do that thing, you think, oh, if there's something I love doing, it'd be great to have it as a job. But if you want to take something you love doing it and turn it into something you truly hate, get paid for it. And if you ever meet a professional musician, say, I used to love playing the piano, now I can't bear to look at the thing, right? Because as soon as you get paid for it, it's work, and you hate it just like everyone else, right? With the downside, you used to enjoy it, right? At least with most work, you never enjoyed it, right? So, like you get people who are kind of like amateur Photoshop workers. Oh, well, maybe you do a little bit. They say, yeah, I was an amateur accountant, and I really loved it, and then I thought I'd go pro. You know, it's like, at least you've always just kind of done it the same way. So this is an example from an Israeli nursery. And they had the problem that parents weren't turning up on time to collect their kids, right? You can imagine this is an issue. So they sent out letters saying, please turn up to get your kids on time, and this is an important thing to do. And then someone had the bright idea and said, well, we'll have a fine. So for every half hour, say, that your child is late, we'll fine you $10. Now, the unfortunate effect of this is that parents didn't see it as a fine. They just saw it as quite cheap childcare that you could pick up at a moment's notice. So what happened is, in fact, that not picking your children up went up, right? Because they just go, oh, I could just not turn up and I can give them $20, or it's shekels, isn't it, in Israel? They give them the money and no one will care, right? So, and what's there? So the school goes, this is disaster. We need to we take the fines away, it's not working. But the behaviour didn't go back to the way it was before. It stayed at the same bad level because it had gone from something you ought to do because you had a moral obligation to something you could have paid for and now you couldn't, right? So you took something where at least there was some sort of sense of fairness in it, and you just made it a cash transaction, and it destroyed that intangible social value. Now, vast amounts of what we do in life, in fact, are bounded by trust, reciprocity, fair exchange, feeling that what I put in I will one day get back. This is what life is run on. And as soon as you put a price on that, you in fact endanger a lot of it. Now, because you don't have to put a literal price on it, I'm sure there are lots of things. This is sort of the fascination with anything which involves any kind of user-generated content, right? There's no way you could ever afford to pay people for the user-generated content they put in at any kind of going rate. You have to create a system where people want to do that. And preserving the fragility of that system is an incredibly nuanced thing, and setting up the right checks and balances. And this is something I come sort of very fascinated with, because if you sort of you could never afford to pay for Wikipedia, but it continues to exist. It's that thing, I always think It's a mistake to ever work out what something might have been worth if you did it, because either like it'd be a staggeringly high figure and people wonder why they did it for free, or it'd been an insultingly low figure and they wonder why they did it at all. Right? This is the I always thought it was in politics. You get sometimes you get in this country. So the Conservative Party wants to see themselves as a party that supports marriage. So they come under pressure to have tax reforms to show how much they value marriage. Now, I think that this is a mistake, right? What you should say is marriage is so important that the state should have nothing to do with it and it should be priceless, right? Because as soon as you go, we worked it out and we've given you a tax break, it's worth £200 a year because marriage is worth that much, right? And that looks rubbish, right? You're much better not putting any price on it at all and resisting altogether, because as soon as you did that, you looked bad. This is another example of how putting a price against something does change your motivation, but in a way you might not anticipate it. This is a snapshot from, they probably had to refresh since I took this, a website called stick.com with 2 Ks, not with 3, that's a different website. Stick.com, which is a website you go to if you want to change your own behavior. So it's a kind of self-pledging website. So people who go there, you select a goal. It's an American website, so the goals tend to be losing weight, you would have guessed, right? Losing weight, giving up smoking, going to church more often, right? Not carrying a firearm all day, right? These things like this, things Americans care about. Right, so you go there and say, I want to give up smoking. So you state your goal. You then nominate a referee, and that referee, in a time period you choose, will be sent an email saying, has this person kept their pledge? And that could be every day or every week or every month. So it's independently monitored. And then finally, there's a forfeit if you don't keep to your pledge. Now that forfeit can just be that they get to tell me off, or I don't get taken out to dinner, or something like that. Or you can name a cash amount, right? And most people choose a cash amount. When they first set the site up, you pledge something like, say, if I have a cigarette, my referee confirms that I've lapsed in my attempt to give up smoking, you can give, say, $500 to the American equivalent of the Red Cross, right? Or Save the Children, something like that. So this seems like you set up an incentive to not, it's all set in place. But what would happen is in times of stress, people have had a kind of cucumber day at work, that kind of thing. We all have them, right? People go, oh my God, I really need a cigarette. $500 to the children, it's money well spent, right? I love children and I love cigarettes, right? I'm like a French monkey, I'm happy, right? So how do you actually put a motivation in place that stops people lapsing in those moments of weakness? So what they started putting in the site was what they called matched charities. So what you do is you would pledge your money not to something you believed in, but something you loathed. So you'd either give your money to, depending on your point of view, the National Rifle Association or the gun control lobby, right? Or you give it to a pro-life charity or an anti-abortion, pro-life or a pro-choice organisation, right? So there's lots of things that divide Americans to the point where they might have a civil war, right? So at any moment, right? They're an explosive bunch, right? So it's set up. Now, it turns out, if you're a liberal trying to give up smoking and you're tempted to have a cigarette, the idea of giving $500 to Charlton Heston and his gun-toting lunatics is enough to freeze you in your tracks every single time. Because giving money to people you hate is really an appalling thought, right? There's what could be worse? And that is a much higher success. And again, there's a curious thing about motivation is that people wouldn't necessarily, if you ask them, so what's going to stop you with smoking? Says, can you set it up so I could give money to people I hate if it goes wrong? People wouldn't choose that. But it's been the most successful thing this website's put in place. So here's another one. This is a slightly drier example, but this is, but no less ingenious. This is understanding that people, their motivations change over time. And we're very bad at predicting our ability to commit to things now or in the future. So who here, you all look terribly young, so you should all have pensions already, right? So who has a pension? Good God, you work in very effective corporations that signed you up to pension, right? So, well, that's impressive. If you were in advertising agencies, they'd all look clueless, right? That's an industry of fools, right? So, selling to, as we say in Mark, as one of the great presidents says, you can fool some of the people all of the time. That's our target, right? So, yeah. So to save more about this we wasted on such people as yourself are so responsible. But many people they don't take out a pension soon enough, because one of the things, this may have put you off at the time, is that as soon as you start paying into a pension, your take-home pay goes down. Right? You're definitely from that month on poorer. And because the immediate loss of money is a real disincentive to people, people go, well, I'll start next month, and then they say they start next month, before they know it, they're 52, right? And it's all too late. Now, one of the things you can do is, in fact, deciding about things in the future is a lot easier than deciding about things now. Things that happen now have a really vivid, powerful effect on us, whereas things in the future we tend to have a slightly more sort of, we don't really know if they happen, right? So the Save More Tomorrow pension, and the clue is in the name, doesn't say sign up to a pension today. It says, when you next get a pay rise, would you like to start paying into a pension then, right? And now this is genius, because most people can't imagine they'll ever get a pay rise, right? So that's something in some distant, never going to happen future. And also you're giving up money you don't even already have, because it's a pay rise, right? So what you have is money that you never think you're going to have that doesn't already belong to you, you're giving away. That's really easy, compared to money that's already in your pocket that you pretty much have to sort of take out and hand over in the moment, right? Under these conditions, 50% more people join the scheme and they save 50% more. And interestingly, you can get people to commit to ratchets where their contribution goes up and up and up, to the point where they're effectively giving themselves quite a substantial pay cut over time. But they commit to it and they stick to those ratchets, because that decision in the future, and once it comes around, they stick to it, right? Because no one likes to be a flip-flopper. So once you've committed to the course of action, you tend to stay with it. So there's this thing where once you understand how people make decisions, you can play their motivations sort of almost against themselves to get them to make the decision that you wanted them to make. Now this is known, this is written up in a book called Nudge, which some of you may have come across, by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein. This is very important when you design a nudge in a process like this, that it is something that people would have wanted to do anyway, right? Getting people to do something that they said they never wanted to do, right, that is not a nudge, right, that is nasty. So it's interesting, I've noticed quite a lot now that companies are doing things which I expect in their marketing departments or their sort of app design departments, they regard as nudges, but clearly offend that rule. So I was quite interested, on my phone, the Amazon app updated, and it came with one-click shopping turned on automatically, and I had to go and I'd never want one-click shopping. I'm bad enough as it is, I don't need further incentive. So I had to make the effort to turn it off, and I've never had it turned on in all the years I've had an account, so they know my preference over time. Right, so that's not a nudge, because it took real effort. It's something I did not want to do, and it took real effort on my part to make it go away. So you do have to think about those compulsions. So this is an interesting debate. I don't remember, the coalition government wanted to stop us all looking. They wanted to get you to say you'd have to ring up your ISP and say if you wanted unfiltered internet content, which of course we all know is a byword for looking at sites about freedom in China. And other things of more pictorial nature, right? But this is not a nudge, because it's massively embarrassing to ring up and say, yeah, there's this site, I really want to support the cause of people in Burma, and there's a site that's censored by authorities and I need unfiltered access to check that. And also there's this other page with videos and stuff where people are really friendly with each other, right? So it's not just because it's really embarrassing to do it. So how are we doing for time there, Kevin? Okay. So the reason, so just to bear in mind, this just when you're asking people, say, well, what would make you do this, is we tend to have a massively optimistic view of ourselves. So we always think we're going to be better, and that we will do things we're going to do, and that we won't need much encouragement to do them. Right? We have to see ourselves like this, or we'd basically be mildly depressed all the time. Or if you're already mildly depressed all the time, you'd be really depressed all the time, right? You'd be like a monkey in a French science experiment, yeah? So you have to rely, so if you ask it, always sort of, whatever they say, knock it a notch down. This is sort of a rule of thumb there. And my final point here, to add up here, it's just an adorable small mammal, I realise. But in all of these designs, you'll notice, it's really small things that matter. It's not putting big things out there that happen. It's making little small changes about the order you ask questions, when you ask questions, that actually make the difference. And I think that's one of the intrigues about this. If you remember right back at the beginning where we were doing that fast, slow thinking, that difference between fast and slow thinking is small, but it's very real. But it's triggering that leads to poorer decisions. But it's small things that will line it back the way you need it to be, so people do what you want them to do. So I think that is my last chart. Thank you very much for listening.